Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Casamassa. We're going to wait another a minute just to make sure we give everyone an opportunity to log on, and then we'll get started promptly. And thank you for attending. All right, we are right at 1 minute past, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So first and foremost, I want to introduce myself. I'm Mike Casamassa. I'm the Vice President of Solutions with Schein, and I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Today's webinar is being hosted by Black Talon, and they are a cybersecurity firm. We're very fortunate to be joined today by Gary Salmon, who is actually the CEO and founder. And on top of that, we're really pleased that you're able to join this overall webinar series. As you can see on the screen that we have in front of you today, this is really part of a much larger series. This is the fourth part of a 5-part series. And then our next one is going to be about automating your practice and really focusing on compliance. But today's topic is on cybersecurity. And it's interesting because this is likely the hottest topic out there, not only in healthcare, but really across the board. You cannot go a single day without hearing of a major, breach or some sort of attack that has been done on an industry or a specific company. And unfortunately, the healthcare industry is easily one of the most lucrative targets that are out there for cyber criminals, which is, I'm pretty certain, why you showed up today for this webinar. So for Gary, he's going to go through, in many instances, the basics of cybersecurity, just to make sure that you understand what it is and what it is not. But more importantly, he's going to talk about the things that you need to do for your practice to make sure that you're protected. And even if there is a breach, what are some of the things that you should be considering, and what things that you have to do to make sure that you handle a breach, especially with sensitive information, in the right manner. So we really look forward to hearing from Gary today. Before I turn it over to him, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping things. And if we can turn the slide. First and foremost, if you have any questions whatsoever, please use the features that are available to you in GoToWebinar. And specifically, there is a question feature and also a chat feature. If you have any questions, just please submit your question, and then what we'll do is at the end, we'll aggregate them and answer them. On top of this, if you have an opportunity and are interested in our other webinars, please go to our website. It's henryscheinSolutionsHub.com. You can view our past webinars, and you can also sign up for any new webinars that are coming. In addition to the Business of Medicine series, we also do a series called Reimagining Care Delivery, which I think is excellent across the board. And we have a lot of customers that, quite frankly, attend all of the webinars, and we've gotten some great feedback. So with that being said, I want to jump into today's topic, which is cybersecurity, and turn it over to Gary. And once again, thank you for spending some time with us today.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I'm Gary Salmon. I'm the CEO of Black Talon Security. We founded Black Talon Security in 2017. Based on a need, right? A need to help healthcare entities of all sizes, from small, GP practices all the way up to large groups in hospitals, and help them try and prevent cyber events within their practices and their groups. So let's kind of go through, some of the objectives for this presentation. So first of all, I lecture all over the country. I've lectured to about 15,000 people in healthcare. And the first thing I'm going to say is, this presentation is not meant to be scary. The reality is, I'm going to present you the facts, right? And I want you to be educated, and I want to empower you so you can make good decisions, whether you're a doctor, an executive, administrator or manager of these practices and groups. You have to have the correct information in order to make good, educated decisions. I'm going to provide you with real world data Almost every single thing that I'm going to present to you today, minus one slide, are actual events that we've dealt with firsthand, not things that I found on the internet or read about, but literally cases we've dealt with. I'm also going to help you understand the problems and, more importantly, the solutions to try and prevent cyber events within your practice, right? The theft of patient data, the encryption via ransomware, things like that. And then, as Mike alluded to, post your questions. I am happy to address any question that you may have. All right, so let's get started. All right, so we've dealt with a lot of really interesting attacks throughout the country on all different size organizations with, you know, a dozen computers and organizations with thousands of computers. And they do present in many times in very similar ways, but every now and then we get crazy ones. All right, so I'm going to give you some of these, you know, as examples so you understand what's going on. So a cyber attack doesn't always have to be from an external resource, right? You know, cyber hackers from Russia, for instance. It could be what's called an insider attack. Now, we have not seen many of these, and they're not too prevalent in healthcare, and we went many years without seeing it. But we dealt with a GP practice in New Mexico recently, where the doctors called us and said, "Hey, you know, we got a problem here. There are hackers in our system. They're changing medical records, they're changing appointments, they're changing financial information, they're modifying health history forms." And I said, "Well, how did you know this?" He said, "Well, I had a patient come in and I said to her, 'Hey, congratulations on being pregnant. When are you due?' And she looked at me and said, 'What are you talking about? I'm not pregnant.' And he pulled up the health history form and said, 'No, you checked the pregnancy box.' And then about an hour later, he prescribed penicillin to a patient. And the patient said, 'Doctor, you know I'm allergic to penicillin. I filled that out on my health history form. Why are you giving me this med?' Then patients were showing up at the wrong times, wrong procedures. And then they started looking at some of their medical notes and noticed sentences like, 'We're in your system. We're smarter than you. We're never going to beat you,' right? You're never going to beat us. You won't be able to figure this out. We demand $666,666. So the practice decided to scrap every single computer, buy all new computers and servers because they couldn't figure out the problem with their current IT resources, brought new computers in, and then within about 24-hour period, these quote unquote attacks happened again. They got a hold of us. We ran some pretty sophisticated tests. And then we said, "Look, your internet shut off. We shut it off. The events are still occurring. It's got to be someone on the inside doing this." And we said, "Do you suspect an employee, a nurse, someone doing this?" And one of the doctors said, "Yeah, actually, I do suspect it is one person." Long story short, we set her up. We put up some very sophisticated software on her computer, caught all of her screen captures, her mouse clicks, right, her keyboard input, and she was the one modifying it. Long story short, we presented all the data over to the FBI based on the practice's request. They arrested her and hit her with felony charges, right? So it doesn't always have to be from the outside, but in most cases they are. We dealt recently with another GP practice where the attack initiated from the doctor's home. She was logging into the practice's network from her home computer. Hackers breached her home, clicked on the icon to remotely connect to the office, and then they distributed their ransomware through her home computer. They knocked this GP practice offline for 2+ weeks, cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the impact it had. We did a large ortho group in Utah recently where the hackers literally breached the network, right? They electronically broke in, they stole all of the practice's data, then they hit them with ransomware and demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to decrypt all the files and to not publish the patient records, which we're going to talk about. All right, and then we're just finishing up a ransomware attack in Arizona where they hit another GP practice, about 20 doctors, encrypted about 150 computers, and they were down for about 3 weeks. Literally could not treat patients for 3 weeks. This attack was so bad. All right, so let's first kind of define the word ransomware. This has been thrown all over the place, right? As Mike said, the media is talking about it all the time. You can't, load your favorite news website and not read an article about some cyber or ransomware. Ransomware is really a piece of malicious code that is delivered to your network in two ways, right? First is through social engineering, which basically means they trick an employee or a doctor at the practice into clicking on something that causes the ransomware code to download into your network. And typically within a matter of minutes, sometimes seconds, it spreads to all the computers in the office or the group. The other way it can be delivered is through a direct attack, where they literally hack into your network, get onto one of your computers, onto your server, and install the ransomware code as if you were sitting in front of the computer installing it for them, right? Very effective methodologies. So let's take a look at the cybersecurity landscape, right? What's really going on right now? Supply chain attacks have been decimating almost every type of industry, especially healthcare. And we really started learning about supply chain attacks when? Well, the Colonial Pipeline. I'd be willing to bet there are folks on this webinar right now that probably couldn't get gas a couple months ago, you know, if you're anywhere from, say, Virginia down to Florida, Texas area, right? The southern and eastern borders of our country, right? Because the threat actors, these hackers, basically hit Colonial Pipeline with a ransomware attack. Then the meat distribution company got hit. Now I want you to look at these two names, DarkSide and REvil. Now I will say just recently they've been basically knocked offline. Maybe FBI, maybe Department of Defense, someone knocked them offline. But here's the thing, both these groups heavily targeted healthcare. All right, we've dealt with a ton of attacks where the healthcare entity, maybe a small little plastic surgery group, all the way up to a large multi-location, multi-doctor practice, have both been hit by DarkSide and REvil. Now, supposedly REvil came back online last night, right? So in many instances, these things are temporary, right? Government agencies go after them, knock some of their systems offline, take out servers, but someone still has the code. They just throw the code back up on another machine and they're kind of back online, right? And there's a whole litany of other organizations that have been hit. And in healthcare specifically, you had Scripps Healthcare out on the West Coast that was down for weeks. UF of Florida, right, got hit this year. Vermont Healthcare was last year, where they shut down a majority of the hospitals in the state of Vermont. Meridian Health, which was a little over a year ago in New Jersey, northern Jersey, they took out multiple hospitals in that attack. Fujifilm, right, a supplier of a lot of digital radiography equipment. The largest dental technology company in the country got hit, and their cloud technology was the subject of multiple cyber attacks. They came out and publicly admitted it. And then there's been these distributed attacks where they go after thousands of practices. So for instance, there was an attack against two IT companies recently, and these two IT companies happen to work in the healthcare space, and a majority of their clients were dental practices. They hit the IT company and they took out thousands of dental practices in a few hours. The same thing happens in the medical groups. So what's the takeaway? The hackers don't care. They don't care if you're a small mom and pop, practice or large entity. They know that a hit's a hit, because they'll walk away with $100,000, $250,000, a couple $1 million, and typically it's all proportional, right, in terms of the amount of work they're going to need to do. So they'll take out a bunch of smaller practices and walk away with $1 million, or they'll hit a small, medium-sized hospital and walk away with a couple million. Some of these demands from some of these bigger entities are in the tens of millions of dollars in terms of the payment that they demand to unlock the patient data. So this is a document from Health and Human Services that was just recently distributed, talking about the Phobos ransomware. The Phobos ransomware group, they're also known as operators or threat actors, are known to primarily target small to medium-sized businesses, including healthcare entities such as hospitals, and typically demand lower ransom amounts compared to other ransomware families. So look, here's a group that specifically goes after healthcare, right, and other entities. And we see that over and over again. Many of them learn that, hey, if I hit a doctor's office or a physician's group, there's a 90% likelihood that they're going to pay me whatever I ask, because they don't want their patient data published on the dark web. Paul Ferrillo is an extremely well-known privacy attorney who specializes in cyber. He posted this on his LinkedIn page just recently. Business leaders have a responsibility to strengthen their cyber defenses to protect the American public and our economy. No company, large or small, is safe from ransomware. right? And that's a big misperception right now. So many healthcare providers say, I'm just a small or medium-sized healthcare entity. Why would the hackers ever target me? And the reality is you get targeted way more than you can ever imagine, because the hackers follow the money, especially in healthcare. They know how to basically get a payment, right? Maybe if they just hit a random small business, a small business like, I don't really care about the data, I'm fine. You hit a healthcare entity and they publish all your health information for your patients, it's a disaster. Right? The US Department of Justice in April created a ransomware task force after declaring 2020 the worst year ever for extortion-related cyber attacks. The issue only seems to be getting worse. The first half of 2021 has already seen a 102% increase, right? 102% increase. And this is what we're seeing across the board. It's ratcheting up like you can't even imagine. So let me ask you this, right? So one of the things I like to do is let's go through some critical thinking exercises together, because as the owner, executive, doctor of the practice, you need to know these things. So first couple of questions, how confident are you that your antivirus software is going to stop a ransomware attack? You know, how confident are you that your data is actually backed up properly? And how do you know your system's not currently compromised? So let's kind of break these down. First of all, antivirus software overall will not stop ransomware. There is no piece of software or hardware that stops all variants of ransomware. It doesn't exist. But so many people say, well, I have the best firewall, I have the best antivirus software, I'm safe. Or that's what your IT resources are telling you. And as a doctor, executive, right, administrator, you're like, okay, that's what they told me, I believe it. I'm not technical, I don't know the answers to this. Here's the other catch. In a majority of the ransomware cases we deal with in healthcare, guess what the criminals do, these threat actors do? Once they breach your network, they figure out what type of antivirus software you have, what type of technology you have, and they disable it. And we prove that when we do forensic investigations, we can see to the split second the moment they shut down the computer's defenses. And then you're helpless. All right, so we got to change our mindset here that this antivirus, these firewalls are going to protect you. They don't work. Do you think these multi-billion-dollar companies don't have antivirus software, don't have firewalls, right? Don't have great technology? They do, but they still get hit for various reasons. Another key element is, in a majority of the cases we deal with, there is no recoverable data. Why? The IT vendors, the internal IT resources have not properly configured your backups. And on top of it, the hackers will monitor your systems, figure out how you back up, where you back up. They figure out how to gain access to your backups, and they will destroy your backups. So typically, this is how a phone call goes to our organization. Hi, I'm Dave. I'm the CFO, the CEO, or the administrator for XYZ practice. We got hit with ransomware, but our IT company is telling us we have a good backup. Can you help us? In the back of our minds, we know there's a high likelihood when we go to recover the backups from their cloud backup, their local backup, the data just will not be there. Why do the hackers do that? Well, because they're guaranteeing now they're going to get paid. If you don't have any data to recover and your whole business is shut down, you're going to pay. You're going to find a way to come up with that money. So one of the things that you have to understand, that in order to be effective, right, in order to deter these types of attacks, this is a team effort. This is a combination of your IT resources, whether internal and or external, your practice, your group, and a cybersecurity firm, all working together to defend your business. If you're missing any of those elements, it's not going to work, right? And we'll help you understand why. So here's the problem. This is one of the biggest problems I see. Internal or external, doesn't matter. You believe that your IT company has you covered, right? Everyone has a Dave, whether Dave's internal or Dave is external. And basically what happens is doctors, administrators read about all these cyber events. They pick up their cell phone and be like, hey, Dave, you got me covered, right? We're good, like no ransomware, right? We're not gonna have that in this practice. Oh yeah, I've got you covered. Remember that $2,000 firewall I just sold you, and I got you the next generation antivirus software. We've got you. Oh, and have you ever had a problem before? Oh no, I don't think we have. You hang up the phone, you're like, good, I'm fine. And then 2 weeks later, you turn around and you walk into the office and the person at the front desk says, hey, we got a major problem. There's a skull and crossbones on every single computer in our office. And I see a note demanding $550,000 from a hacker. So we have to understand that just like in healthcare, there's a huge differential between generalists and specialists, and they both play a very, very critical role in healthcare, right? So in the dental and medical world, right, they're specialists. So for the medical, from a medical perspective, you have your internist GPs, and then you have your specialists. If you need open heart surgery, you're not going to a cardiologist or a GP, right? You're going to go to a cardiothoracic surgeon, right? And just like a cardiothoracic surgeon wouldn't deal with strep throat, right? The GP would. So the same thing applies in the IT world. Just because someone is good at fixing computers and setting computers up and supporting you doesn't mean they're a specialist. That doesn't mean they understand security. It is a totally, totally different world. All right, a piece of software is not cybersecurity. If someone sells you a piece of software and says you're secure now, give it back to them and run the other way. It doesn't work. It doesn't exist. There's no such animal right now in the cyber world. Another really important thing to understand is if someone's setting up the security for you, right? Your IT company is like, hey, we'll put the security in place for you. How can they audit and assess their own work to know if they're doing a good job? Does that exist anywhere else in the business world? If you get audited by the IRS, does the IRS say, hey, just have your accountant fill out these forms and send them in, you'll be good? Of course they don't, right? A third party must come in to evaluate the security of your network, do assessments, and then make recommendations back to the practice, to the group on how to harden their network. So this is the problem, right? I was monitoring a very, very popular Facebook healthcare group with, something like 40,000 doctors on it. And one of the doctors says, hey, I have some really, significant concerns about security for my practice. What should I do? Well, right away, an IT company chimed in and I blocked it out, but this is the actual post. And the CEO of this pretty decent sized IT company says, we have plans of all sizes to address the ransomware issue. They line up with the HIPAA requirements. You want to see a managed firewall, anti-ransomware software, which I don't even know what that is, right? I'm in the cyber world. Backup and disaster recovery and encrypted email. I don't even understand what encrypted email has to do with ransomware, right? It makes no sense whatsoever. But to the untrained person, the doctor, the administrator that doesn't really understand this, you're like, wow, that seems easy. Let's do this. Okay, so you have folks that are in the IT space that are providing completely false information and perpetuating this problem, right? Now you're starting to see why this is such an epidemic, because you're not getting good education on as to what you need to do to prevent this stuff. So I want you to think about this for a second. How long does the average outage last? Right? How long do you think it lasts? 3 days, 5 days, 10 days? Based on our data and almost any data you can Google, the average ransomware attack, regardless of the size of your business, 10 computers, 10,000 computers, is going to knock you down for about 10 days. Okay? It takes a tremendous amount of time to recover from ransomware. Why? Because in many cases, the hackers, the ransomware code, this malicious code, literally destroys the computer, right? You have to format the hard drives, rebuild everything from scratch. Imagine walking back into your practice, into your group tomorrow, finding out you have ransomware, and then a firm like ours telling you, hey, by the way, you need to rebuild this entire network from scratch. Every single computer in your environment has to go. What are you going to do? How are you going to treat patients? How are you going to look up information? How are you going to schedule? How are you going to bill? It's a huge, huge mess. So I'm going to give you the smallest common denominator, a single provider practice, right? Plastic surgeon, ENT, right? Derm practice, GP practice, just a single doc. The minimum you're going to walk away from a ransomware attack is typically about $170,000, absolute bare bones minimum. And this is from our data. If you're a larger group with multiple doctors, multiple locations, larger databases, you're really talking millions of dollars, right? Ransomware payments will probably approach $1 million, right? That the outage will cost your practice tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, depending on the size, maybe more. Your legal fees, right? Your mitigation fees. It's a huge, huge number. And most people have no concept. A large physicians group we just recently did incident response on, they only had $25,000 worth of coverage. That was gone on day one, right? They were just out of pocket for the next 9 days, including having to come up with $500,000 in ransom payments, which they had to go back to the doctors individually, personally, to ask, hey, you got to chip in, right? We don't have enough insurance for this. Practice will close if we can't come up with this money. So what did all these breaches that we've dealt with have in common? Because there is a tremendous amount of commonality between every single attack we deal with. Here it is. Okay, if I could summarize it with 4 things, this is what we see in almost every practice that's breached. They have an internal or external IT company or internal IT resources. They have antivirus software, they have firewall, and they thought they had valid backups. And then they get hit and none of this mattered, right? They were led down the wrong path thinking that they would be able to prevent this type of attack. So one of the things that I want you to understand is that ransomware is typically the end of the attack. Meaning when you get breached, you're not going to have typically any notifications, alarm bells, sirens going off, your IT company calling you like, hey, we think someone's in your system. Okay, I've only ever seen that twice, right? Where the IT company said, hey, we're under attack, we need your help. You know when we get called? When everything's encrypted and stolen, right? It's over. But most of the time when we do these forensics investigations, we will see that the threat actors for most healthcare orgs have been in the system for about 3 weeks, right? And Sophos had reported about 11 days, but they're also looking at a lot of very large companies that have better technology than most healthcare providers can put in their systems or on their networks, and they're going to get alerted a little earlier, right? So they're in the system for a long period of time. Why? They're learning everything about you, how you operate, where you store your data, how you access your data, stealing usernames, stealing passwords, looking for cybersecurity insurance. The FBI sent out alert. This is very recent, within the last, call it month and a half. Loss of access to law enforcement networks may impede investigation capabilities and create prosecution challenges. Targeting healthcare networks can delay access to vital information, potentially affecting care and treatment of patients, including cancellation of procedures, rerouting to unaffected facilities, and compromise protected health information, PHI, or really EPHI. All right, so Conti is a threat group that we've dealt with firsthand an unbelievable amount of times, way too many times. They are unbelievable, right? They are relentless. They will hit any size org, from a small practice all the way up to some of the largest ones, and they steal all the patient data, right? In almost every single case, I will say close to 100% of the time, when Conti gets on your network, they will walk away with your entire patient database, all your records, every attachment, every HR file, financials, everything is gone. All right, so this is no joke, right? What we're dealing with. So in terms of some of the facts, the reality is for most healthcare orgs, 100% recovery is not possible in the short term. You have too many interconnected systems. Some of them have kind of been band-aided together over the years, older technology, and because every single computer and server has to be rebuilt, you limp along for many weeks. Downtime's the biggest issue, right? At day 3, what we typically see, and keep in mind, day 3 is only day 3 out of 10 days to fully recover, kind of get back online. Around day 3, the doctors start freaking out, right? It's just the reality of it. We've been down for 3 days. We can't treat any patients. Patients are going to other facilities. Patients are flipping out. Why? Well, can't access their EHR, EMR, can't take x-rays, you can't do imaging, right? Can't access any type of diagnostic machines because they're all connected. Now imagine day 6, right? Day 10, struggling to get back online. It can impact your brand and reputation. Everyone posts everything on social media now, and patients aren't stupid. You know, when they know that you've been down for a couple days, you know what the first thing that I hear the practice administrators and doctors say to me? Well, the patients are calling and accusing us of being hit by a cyber attack because we can't schedule them. Patients understand when you're down for a couple hours, not a big deal. When you're down for a couple days, they know what's going on. All right, so let's talk about what I consider to be the #1 risk in healthcare. It's the data theft and extortion. So what this is known as is called the double extortion, where not only do these threat groups like Conti and all these other ones steal your data, but they also encrypt all of your data. So let's just say for argument's sake, you have a good backup, right? They didn't get into your cloud backups. Your IT company can recover it. But the threat group, we'll pick on Conti, stole all your data. Now you have a decision to make. Because if you don't pay them, even though you have all your data, they will publish your data. And I will show you examples of this in a couple minutes. So what are you going to do as the owners of the practice? Are you not going to pay them? Be like, I don't care, publish all my patients' healthcare records and health history forms and lab reports. Or are you going to pay so that doesn't show up? That's the problem, right? They get smarter and smarter. Every couple months, they figure out a new way to guarantee that you're going to pay them. So they have these shaming websites, and I'm going to show you one in a couple minutes, where let's just say they hit your practice. 2 weeks goes by, you haven't paid, you'll get an email or some message will pop up on your screen. Hey, it doesn't look like you want to pay us. So let me tell you what we're going to do here. I'm going to take 10% of all your patient records and I'm going to publish them. And then I'm going to send you the link. And if you know how to get on the dark web, you can look at all your patients on the dark web, and so can thousands of other people. That's what they do. In a very, very high percentage of these cases, they will publish your data if you do not pay. We just finished up an extortion case with a healthcare group out in the North Carolina and Tennessee area. It was smaller. They had a couple facilities, 66 locations, 66 computers, I should say, not locations. And Ryuk demanded $1.6 million from them. I'd be willing to bet many of the groups on this call have way more than 66 computers. Some may have less, I get that. 1.6 million just for the ransom payment, and they wouldn't negotiate because they knew what they had, right? They had hundreds of thousands of patients' records. So what if you walked into your office on Monday and found all your computers encrypted and your data stolen? There's a note on your screen. Hi, we're Conti, we encrypted all your data and we stole all your data. Click on this link to pay us. What are you going to do? What's your plan? Right, so I can't get into this in a lot of detail on this presentation, but you have to have emergency plans in place to deal with this. And keep in mind, if your plan is I'm going to call my IT company, I will tell you in many cases that's not going to work. Maybe your IT company was ground zero for the attack. Maybe the IT company was targeted by this threat group. They attacked your IT vendor, and then they used the IT company's computers and connections to your computers to attack yours. So they're not going to answer the phone when you call. Then what do you do? So who's targeting your practice or group and why? Well, I will tell you most of the ransomware cases do in fact come out of Russia. In fact, the groups typically operate, I'll say maybe under the radar of some of these governments, but these governments just don't care because there's billions of dollars being pumped into these threat groups, and then they spend that money in those countries many times. So they'll turn a blind eye. China is notorious for stealing intellectual property. Russia is notorious for ransomware. And why are they targeting healthcare entities? You're easy targets. Most healthcare entities are not doing really anything to actually protect themselves from ransomware attacks. And that's the problem we're trying to address. So the reality is, as much as this is tough to hear and listen to, you can fight back and win. But the reality is you have to commit to doing something. You gotta get out of the mindset of this antivirus and firewall solution and patching computers as being the only way to beat this, okay? That doesn't really work. Are those critical components of security? Yeah, of course. I'm not gonna say it's not, but it's not cutting it anymore, right? It's not gonna protect you. You gotta build strong, resilient systems, right? You have to implement these multi-layered approaches. And most importantly, you have to put up a formidable defense so they don't even get into your network to begin with. Too many businesses are relying on quote unquote alarm bells that are going to go off when someone gets into your network. But in many cases, once those alarms go off, it's too late, right? Or the alarms go off and no one hears them because it's 3 a.m. in the morning and there's no one that can do anything for you at that period of time. All right, so you have to implement these advanced security solutions. You really need to start working with a third-party cybersecurity firm. This is the cost of doing business nowadays, right? It's not what we want to hear. This is the reality of it. You have to work with specialists. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's, like I started the presentation, there's a huge differential between IT companies and cyber firms, even just on their credentialing. Can you hang up a shingle on your door and say, you know, Mary Smith, MD, if you never went to dental school or medical school? I'm sorry, I misspoke, medical school. Could, it's illegal. But what we're seeing here is IT companies are saying they're cybersecurity specialists. They don't have anyone on their staff that's credentialed. But there's no law saying that they can't say that. So a lot of healthcare orgs are being led down the wrong path, thinking they're being protected, and they're actually not. So moving to the cloud, this is a really interesting discussion. We could probably spend an hour talking about it. I'm not against the cloud in any way. I think the cloud's great technology, but you also have to understand, if you're going to say, take all my patient records, get them off my server and put it in the cloud, you're ultimately going to fail, right? Because in many cases, cloud technology is targeted by hackers. They can say, all right, let's go after one practice with 100,000 records, or I can go after a EHR, EMR provider with tens of millions of patient records. So it's a huge target on those types of systems. Second, if your local network, those computers sitting at your front desk in the doctor's offices get breached, they can install technology that will allow them to access your cloud, or they'll watch you access the cloud, or they'll steal your username and password and gain access to the cloud themselves. So you can't offset risk by just moving to the cloud. Insurance, I tell every single one of our clients, buy cybersecurity insurance. However, cybersecurity insurance is there as a stopgap. In the event that your network is breached, right, you will have coverage, depending on how much you have, that may cover a portion of your event or all of it, but you're still going to be down for 2 weeks. Yes, your bills may get paid. That didn't solve the problem, right? You got to address the threats, and you have to harden your networks. If you're not doing this network hardening, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, you're ultimately going to fail. Right? And all that's happening is it's driving premiums through the roof. All right, so one of the things I want you to understand about ransomware is that HIPAA defines a ransomware attack as a data breach. So many times I talk to healthcare entities, they're like, oh, we had a ransomware attack. Oh, okay, what'd you do with that? I don't know, my IT guy came in and just kind of made it all go away. Okay, we got a major problem here, right? That was considered a data breach at the federal level and in many states. So you just kind of made that whole legal issue, quote unquote, disappear, get swept under the carpet. I don't know, I'm the doctor. I don't know this stuff. Well, if your nurse gets stuck with a needle, can you claim you didn't know about OSHA? It's the exact same concept, right? I get it. There's a lot of laws and regulations out there, and you just want to treat patients or run the practice or group, but you got to understand the risks of doing these types of things. So you have to bring in a firm that can do a digital forensics investigation to determine whether or not your patient records were accessed, stolen. How do you know the threat actors aren't still in your system? In some of these cases, they'll hit the healthcare entity today, and in 4 weeks from now, they'll get hit again. Why? An IT company doesn't know how to look for this stuff. They don't know how to get these threat actors out of these systems. All right, so we have to understand what's going on here, and we have to think differently. And the other issue that I see a lot is these IT companies, they don't want anyone to know that their client got hit by a ransomware attack, because everyone's connected in these communities. Dr. A knows Dr. B, who knows Dr. C, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to sign up with that IT company. They had a ransomware attack at Dr. Smith's office, you know, or orthopedics of the South. You get the idea. So in many instances, they get the broom out, kind of sweep it under the rug, and all you know is that you're back up online. And then guess what happens? Your data shows up on the dark web. Now what do you do? From a compliance standpoint, that's the worst case scenario, right? FBI, some investigative organization, right? They start finding your data, the Office for Civil Rights, right? Starts finding this data, or reports are filed saying, hey, my data was found online. I'm a patient of this practice. And now you get that phone call or letter and you're in a precarious situation. So there is some evolution in terms of what ransomware does. We talked about encrypting the data. We also talked about the theft of the data. We also talked about the release of the data, the publishing of it. Now there is the contacting of the data. You can Google this, right? There's a derm practice in Florida where they refuse to pay the hackers, meaning the doctors refused to pay the hackers. So you know what the hackers did? They started emailing their patients saying, hey, I'm from XYZ hacking group. Dr. Smith won't pay. We're gonna publish the photographs we have of you, pay us $5,000 or convince the doctor to pay. A recent attack we did, the practice refused to pay because they had a backup. They started emailing every single one of their employees. They emailed about 150 employees within this physicians group, telling them, hi, we're Conti, your business isn't paying, I have your HR files, and I'm going to perform identity theft on you if you don't convince your boss to pay. That's what they say, your boss. So guess what it did for all those employees? Sent them in a state of panic. Imagine all of your employees running to you, be like, oh my gosh, my identity, rent, all this is going to be a mess. They're going to steal my identity. They're going to open up bank accounts. It's a mess. This stuff is not easy to deal with. This is an example of release of data. This was actually an orthodontic practice that we did some recovery for, very large group. They stole all of the patient's data. When we met with the doctors didn't actually believe that these criminals did this. So we asked the criminals to prove that they stole this practice's data. They sent us a 1 gigabyte file. And when we opened it, thousands and thousands of pieces of patient data. And that's when the doctors flipped out, right? And they went through the whole typical, victimization scenario where, oh my gosh, our business is over. What patient's ever going to trust us again? What mom is going to trust us or dad's going to trust us? It's going to end up on Facebook and the news, and everyone's going to be talking about it in town, right? That's the reality of what's going on. All right, so this is the one slide that was not something we did directly. The way I found this was I went online and I went to one of these threat groups, dark web websites, and I found literally hundreds and hundreds of pieces of patient data, complete health history forms, social security cards, driver's licenses of all of their patients, right? Another health history form. Lab reports, clinic notes. Just think about that. Think about all the notes your doctors put into their EMR, EHR systems, all the lab reports you get, pathology, everything like that. Imagine if that was all being published on the dark web right now. What would that look like from a reputation and a legal, right, compliance perspective? All right, so one of the other things that we see way too frequently is the installation of screen sharing software as part of this attack methodology. So what are we talking about? Well, what the hackers do is they actually deploy a legit piece of screen sharing software that gives them on-demand access to almost every computer in your practice. So this was something we found on a practice's network, and they were watching every single employee and every single doctor, every email they opened, every patient record they opened, every x-ray, every photograph, right? Every single piece of data related to their practice was exposed. And for one of the doctors, they're like, so they were actually reading my emails as I was typing them. I said, yes, if they were in the system, right, while you're opening that email, they saw everything you saw. And in many of these cases, we find unique malicious code. So what we have to do is, part of the investigation is analyze the code to understand what it's doing. How's it impacting the system? Does it steal data? Does it install more malicious code? Does it crack passwords? Right? So this is a piece of analysis we did recently on a cyber attack out in Southern California. And when we analyzed the malware, notice the circle, contains functionality to steal Chrome passwords or cookies. Contains functionality to capture and log keystrokes. So when you type in, right, the web address, just being completely hypothetical, Blue Cross of Kansas.com, and then a screen pops up, prompts you to enter your username and password. Your staff enters your username and password, right, to get into that website. Potentially this code will steal that username and password, and someone sitting over in Russia will log in and look at all your claims. Steals your saved usernames and passwords in Google Chrome. All those websites you go to that you say, hey, save my username and password, that's great. It harvests that file with your usernames and passwords and cracks the file, and now they have access to the name of the website along with your username and password. So they just sit there and log in as you. Now I get it, if you have certain types of multi-factor authentication enabled, that may be useless to them. But they still have a valid username and password. So one of the things that I hear a lot from the doctors, and especially the practice administrators or executives, because they seem to take the biggest hit, is the mental aspect of these types of attacks. The thought of being completely victimized, right? And everyone's seeing everything that's going on in your business, exposing your data, your patients. And then obviously the financial aspect. But what a lot of people don't think about are questions like this. We actually had a practice write up these questions for us, right? What was the biggest impact? And these are some of the things that they came up with. They can't schedule, right? They don't know who's showing up. Those 70 patients you have scheduled for tomorrow, that are scheduled for the next day, that are scheduled for the next 10 days, they're all still showing up. So over a 10-day period, you see 70 patients a day maybe, depending on the type of practice you are, 700 patients you're gonna turn around and send home. They're not gonna be able to reschedule with you because your scheduler doesn't work. All right, how do you collect accounts receivable? How do you manage cash flow? You can't bill insurance when your systems don't work or you don't have access to them. What happens if this leaks right to the public and the news shows up at your front door? Especially in these smaller communities, it's gonna happen. So this is a communication with a threat group. This was Avidon. Avidon is actually out of business right now. They shut their network down. But this was a smaller amount. They only requested $5,000 from this victim. But what you're actually looking at, and the reason I put this up is this is our security guys actually communicating with the criminals. Think of it as a real-time chat with an airline, right? You're like, want to change your flight. So you go to the website for the airline and you're like, hey, I would like to change my flight till tomorrow instead of today. Can you help me out? We literally are sitting there chatting in real time with the criminals that just took this network down. This is a healthcare entity that just recently got hit, about 150 computers in their environment. Look at the center of the screen. Conti's asking for $550,000. No joke. $550,000. That's just for the ransomware payment. Doesn't include all the legal fees, the recovery fees, the rebuilding of the computers, the buying of new computers, right? The downtime. This will ultimately cost this practice over $1 million. That's a small group, right? So one of the other big problems that most healthcare orgs have is they actually don't understand where they have risk. So this is something known as attack surface. Do you have remote employees? Do you have remote billing people? Do you have remote consultants? Your accountants, right? Dictation companies. A lot of these practices have set up this remote access for all these people. And then what happens is one of these companies that remotes into your system gets hit, and the threat actors use their systems to attack yours. But unless you're engaging with a cyber firm to help you understand where you have risk and how to mitigate that, what you're doing is you have all these additional exposures that you're not even tracking, right? And many practices don't even have proper cyber hygiene. The employees share passwords. You're using easy to guess passwords. Your passwords have been used in other breaches, and they're still being used on your current systems, and the hackers can figure this stuff out pretty quickly. There's databases that can be searched for people's usernames and passwords. Off-the-shelf software is not cybersecurity, right? And I keep hitting this because, I see it all the time. Practices believe that they're protected and then turn around and they have the skull and crossbones on all their computers. So one of the ways you can deal with this is going through a cybersecurity assessment. Now, a cybersecurity assessment is scalable based on the size of the org, right? If you're a smaller organization, maybe with a couple doctors, yeah, you may get away with, about 100 to 150 question assessment. And we're going to ask you questions like, how do you store your data? Where is it stored? How do you back it up? Who has access to it? Is it encrypted? How do you communicate with patients? What does your attack surface look like? But for larger orgs, it could be a 40-hour process, right? If you have a bunch of facilities and locations. But it helps you understand where you have this operational risk. And we'll expose things that you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that we were even doing that. Since when are we doing that? I was told we're not doing that anymore. But the person sitting next to that person making that comment's like, oh, we've had that for the last 10 years. That's how it works. Another nice quote from Paul Frillo on his LinkedIn page: cyber risk today has never been a bigger problem. Cyber risk needs attention. It needs board oversight, right? So if you're a large group, probably have a board, executive committee, it needs actionable information. A vulnerability assessment, which is what we just discussed, definitely provides that actionable information to allow all constituencies in the corporate governance structure to make prudent and timely decisions regarding the company's cybersecurity posture. And they are more than reasonable in today's regulatory and litigation prone cyber environments, right? So this is a big issue, right? You can't just dive headfirst into the cyber world without understanding where you have this risk. And a cyber risk assessment, security risk assessment, whatever terminology you want to throw at it, often helps you understand where you have risk. So how do cyber attacks actually go down, right? We talked about tricking employees, which we'll get into a little bit more detail in a few minutes, but hackers exploit vulnerabilities on your firewall and your network. If you pulled your firewall logs, and most people don't even have logging enabled, which is a whole other discussion. If you pulled your firewall logs, you would be absolutely horrified by the number of attacks that the firewall has blocked. We look at firewall logs, and sometimes in a 24-hour period, they've been hit 1,000 times easily. If you're a larger group, maybe even more. But even small little mom and pop practices, they could get hit hundreds to 1,000 times per day. And eventually, the firewall's not going to hold up. So the hackers will scan your firewall trying to find a vulnerability. A vulnerability is like an unlocked door or window on your home. And then they're going to open it and walk right in and take whatever they want. So the bottom line is any device connected to the network and internet's vulnerable, right? It's got an operating system, it has a processor, it has memory, it often has a hard drive. It's everything from a laptop to a desktop to a tablet to a server. So that smart thermostat or television hanging on your wall, they're all exploitable, right? So the issue is you got to be able to address it. And I will say probably 90% of healthcare entities have no idea about this. They don't know where they're vulnerable, and their vulnerabilities are not being identified and managed. So you have to have a real-time vulnerability management system in place, because right now, the reality is probably everyone on this call has vulnerabilities on their network, but they don't know they exist. They don't know which devices they're vulnerable or are vulnerable. So cyber firms can come in and constantly analyze all of these computers, these devices, and help you understand where you have risk, and then present you with risk mitigation strategies to solve the vulnerability issue. Hey, you got, doors wide open over here. You're just focusing over here. You think you're vulnerable over there. We're telling you you're going to get hit here. But the IT companies, they don't do this for the most part. They don't identify vulnerabilities in real time. Or they run a scan. They're like, oh, doctor, administrator, don't worry, I'll run a HIPAA scan for you. You're good. They run some kind of junky piece of software. They hand you a report. You don't understand what the heck's on it. You're like, okay, I guess I'm good. Move on. Click risk. Employees and doctors present click risk. This is where you're receiving phishing, spear phishing, social engineering attacks against the practice. Someone is clicking on a link, opening an attachment, or visiting a malicious website, and it results in an attack against the practice or group. Cybersecurity awareness training is required under federal law. It is part of being HIPAA compliant. You cannot be HIPAA compliant if you do not have an ongoing cybersecurity awareness training program in place. All right, it must be in place. You have to empower your team members to make good decisions. They have to know how to identify a threat that presents through an email, through the use of the internet. And it's not, hey, let's have a little pizza party and talk about, some phishing emails. We'll check the box, sign this piece of paper, we're good. It doesn't work, right? They have to be trained by professional organizations that understand how these types of attacks occur and then what employees can do to identify them. So pen testing or penetration testing. I sit on a lot of boards and panels with many law enforcement agencies. And one of the things that I always hear federal law enforcement say is this: you can get a pen test in one of two ways. Either the hackers will do it for you illegally, or you pay and get it done. Guess which one's a lot more expensive in the long run? The one that the criminal does. So a penetration test is where an ethical hacker, right, a good person, tries to break into your network. And then if they're successful, they turn that data over to your IT resources explaining, hey, here's how we broke in. And guess what? Here are the steps you need to follow to prevent that from happening. You have to pen test your networks. I will say a majority of healthcare, especially small and medium-sized groups, they're not doing this, right? So eventually you're going to get hit, right? Because the criminals are doing it without your permission, right? They'll sit in their offices in Russia and just pen test your network until they can get in or they move on to the next one, right? So you got to think differently, all right? So ethical hackers will help harden your network. All right, so how do we win this fight, right? In the end, how do we really win this battle? So there's a couple very important things that must occur in order to be more secure. Nothing's 100%. Let me put that right out there. If anyone tells you, you'll never get hit with this technology, right? Turn your back and run the other direction. But here are the must-haves. You have to have real-time vulnerability management. You have to have software on all of your computers. This is not antivirus software, by the way. This is vulnerability software that scans your devices in real time and says, hey, I'm workstation, 110, right? And, ortho of the South, I have a vulnerability on my machine, or I have hundreds of vulnerabilities on my machine. Help, right? And that information is relayed up to a cyber firm. The security analyst can look at it, help determine, is this a low risk, medium, high risk, and then take action based on that. But having these quarterly scans or these annual scans, which we typically see nowadays, completely useless, okay? It doesn't really do anything. That's a point of time. That's like, hey, this is where you're vulnerable today, but in a month from now, you'll have a whole new set of vulnerabilities because that's how the hacking community works. You have to have an external pen test at the minimum. If you're a larger group, you need to do an internal pen test as well. And that's where, ethical hackers get on the inside of the network and try and expose your data. Cybersecurity awareness training we just talked about. Threat hunting, right? There's some technology out there that helps determine, whether or not, you have stuff going on your network right now, right? Simulated phishing. This is a follow-up to the training. How do you know that the training was effective? So you basically engage with a cyber firm to phish all of your employees and doctors to see, are they clicking on things that they shouldn't be? And then if they click on a link or open an attachment that they should have identified as being malicious, what typically happens is they're redirected to a video that says, hey, this is a simulated phishing attack. Unfortunately, you clicked on a malicious link. Here's a little video you should watch in order to train you so you don't do it again. And then, HR, practice administrator, doctor, whoever gets a report showing you who's passed, who's failed, things like that. Work with a cyber firm who has credentialed individuals, not an IT company that makes you feel good. People who do this 24/7 and have many, many years of experience doing this. All right, so we did an IR case, incident response case out in Denver just recently. And this was a thought from one of your colleagues that he got hit by ransomware and their practice, good sized group, was shut down for about 2 solid weeks. And every morning I was on site in Denver because this is a really big attack that hit hundreds of healthcare entities all throughout the Denver metro area. And I sat down with this group along with my security guys every morning and said, hey, here we are, here's what's going on. And the doctor said, you know what, today was like, it was if I pulled into my parking lot and noticed my entire building gone. All that was really left was the foundation. said, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, I can walk around my whole practice here and the computers are on, but there's skull and crossbones all over them and all my data is encrypted. I don't know if I'm ever going to get it back. Right. And that's what is ingrained. Right. And people who've been victimized by this, they also say, you know what, every day I walk into the office, I'm wondering, is it going to happen again? Because it was so impactful, you know, mentally and physically to them. Right. It's draining. So with that being said, we will answer any questions you may have. So I don't have the window open. I'll open in a second here. But if you want to post questions, we'll go ahead and address them. Here's my contact information. I'm an open book. My whole world is about educating people and helping people mitigate risk. So if you have a question, concern, reach out to me. You know, I'm happy to help out. Secondly, I want to give a big shout out to Henry Schein for being, you know, so progressive with this stuff and really leading the charge to try and protect their clients from these types of events. So if you need help from Black Talon to do a security risk assessment, to do security for your practice or group, you know, we're absolutely happy to help. So with that being said, see if we have any questions.
Hey, Gary, that was terrific. This is Justin, and thank you so much for coming on and doing this. And we'll just say, in an effort to save a little bit of time, I'll combine two questions that did come in that
Okay.
play along the same lines, and then, you know, we'll ask our customers to work through their representation at Schein to connect with you for anything further, to do risk assessment, so on and so forth. So let me read these to you together, and hopefully you can answer them kind of collectively. So how often do you check and test security when you are partnered up with a practice? And then when that practice happens to bring on new systems online, you know, do you work with them to firmly secure those systems? So that's one quick question.
Okay.
And the other are, you know, are there any specific groups, specialists, or locations that get attacked more than others?
Okay. So start with the second one. I don't really see them really targeting specific healthcare verticals. Like I don't see like plastics getting hit more than derm or orthopedics. It's kind of all lumped in the same. It's all over the place. In terms of security monitoring, typically the firewalls in the group's environment is tested on a monthly basis. So every 30 days, we'll attack the firewalls to make sure that they're properly configured, you know, and they're locked down. The inside, so all the computers on the inside of the network, we test them every 6 hours, right? So that the tests are running 24/7, every 6 hours. We're receiving, you know, real-time data back on vulnerabilities, and that's critical. Kind of going back to what I was saying before, and that question may have popped up before I kind of ended it, but going back to what I said before, these concepts of testing quarterly or annually, it's just not worth it, right? You're basically kind of just throwing money away because it's going to be stale by the time you get the report from the cyber firm. So, I mean, there is some actionable stuff that you'll get out of it, but in a month from now, it's not going to be really relevant. So.
Perfect. And then I'll just close out and say, you know, there'll be a follow-up email that consists or contains an ebook that goes into some detail on what Gary discussed today, specifically around these topics and Black Talon partnering with us. So look for that attachment over the next 24 hours. And then, as Michael alluded to early on, you know, please use the resource center inside henryscheinsolutionsHub.com to learn more about all different solutions in the portfolio. Reach out, set up a demo, set up time to speak with a representative, or again, submit any questions. So thank you, Gary, for joining today, and thank you to all of our customers for spending some time.
Yep, thank you so much. My honor. Have a good day, everyone.